The countries where there are most good jobs are the countries which have followed for years my recipe now. Germany has kept down inflation. That is my top priority.
November 28, 1990. The world's cameras are trained on 10 Downing Street as Britain's most powerful prime minister in decades stands on the doorstep for the final time. Margaret Thatcher, the woman who had dominated British politics for over a decade, is visibly struggling to maintain her composure. "We're leaving Downing Street for the last time after 11 and a half wonderful years," she announces, her voice wavering. But there's nothing wonderful about this moment. Less than a week earlier, she had been forced to resign after losing the support of her own party. The Iron Lady had been brought down not by her political opponents, but by the very people she had led to 3 consecutive election victories. Today, we're examining one of the most dramatic political downfalls in modern British history. A story of power, betrayal, and how even the mightiest can fall when they stop listening to those around them. To understand Thatcher's fall, we first need to understand just how powerful she had become. As Britain's first female prime minister, Margaret Thatcher wasn't just a politician, she was a force of nature. She had taken on the unions, reformed the economy, and even won a war in the Falklands. By 1987, when she secured that unprecedented third term, she seemed invincible. But power has a way of changing people, and Thatcher's success had made her increasingly autocratic. One of her ministers, Chris Patten, later described her management style with a memorable metaphor. There was always that slight sense of the anaconda in the chandelier if you got things wrong. Cabinet meetings became less about debate and more about Thatcher announcing her decisions and daring anyone to disagree. She was quite open about this approach. In a 2005 interview, she said, "I think sometimes the prime minister should be intimidating. There's not much point being a weak, floppy thing in the chair, is there?" As a trained scientist, she believed in gathering facts and then delivering a verdict. The problem was, her colleagues were increasingly tired of being lectured to rather than consulted. By 1990, 2 issues were eroding her support. First, the deeply unpopular poll tax, a flat-rate local tax that everyone paid regardless of income, had sparked riots in Trafalgar Square. Conservative MPs were terrified it would cost them their seats. Second, and more importantly, was Europe. Thatcher's increasingly hostile attitude toward European integration was putting her at odds with many in her own party. This brings us to one of history's great political ironies. The man who would trigger Thatcher's downfall was the least likely assassin imaginable. Sir Geoffrey Howe was known for being mild-mannered and soft-spoken. Back in 1978, a Labour MP had mocked him, saying that being attacked by Geoffrey was like being savaged by a dead sheep. He himself admitted that his style was one of tenacious repetition rather than shouting. A quiet, consistent badger, as he put it. But Thatcher's fatal error was underestimating this seemingly harmless colleague. Geoffrey Howe had been one of her closest allies in her early years. He'd served as Chancellor and Foreign Secretary, but their relationship had soured badly. In July 1989, she removed him as Foreign Secretary, replacing him with the rising star John Major. To soften the blow, she gave Howe the title of Deputy Prime Minister, but everyone knew the truth. As Kenneth Baker, another cabinet colleague, recalled, Deputy Prime Minister is a non-job like the Vice Presidency of the United States. He knew he was being sidelined. For over a year, Howe swallowed his frustration. But on October 30th, 1990, Thatcher went too far. In Parliament, responding to calls from Brussels for greater European integration, she unleashed one of her most famous soundbites. No, 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 it was vintage Thatcher, defiant and uncompromising. But for Howe, who believed in closer European cooperation, it was the final straw. 2 days later, he resigned. Thatcher remained defiant. On November 12th, at the annual Lord Mayor's banquet, she deployed a series of cricket metaphors to show she wasn't backing down. "I'm still at the crease," she declared, "though the bowling's been pretty hostile of late. And in case anyone doubted it, can I assure you there will be no ducking the bouncers, no stonewalling, no playing for time. The bowling's going to get hit all around the ground, that's my style." The next day, November 13th, Geoffrey Howe stood up in Parliament to deliver his resignation speech. What followed was one of the most devastating speeches in British parliamentary history. Using Thatcher's own cricket analogy against her, he said, "It is rather like sending your opening batsmen to the crease, only to find that their bats have been broken before the game by the team captain." The imagery was perfect. Howe was saying that Thatcher was undermining her own ministers, making it impossible for them to negotiate effectively with Europe. But he didn't stop there. He ended with a direct challenge. "The time has come for others to consider their own response to the tragic conflict of loyalties with which I have myself wrestled for perhaps too long." This was an open invitation for someone to challenge Thatcher for the leadership. And there was one man who had been waiting years for exactly this moment. Michael Heseltine, nicknamed Tarzan after he once grabbed the parliamentary mace and waved it above his head, had resigned from Thatcher's cabinet 4 years earlier. He'd spent those years plotting his return. Within days of Howe's speech, Heseltine announced he would challenge Thatcher for the Conservative Party leadership. Now here's where Thatcher made a series of catastrophic misjudgments. On the day of the first leadership vote, instead of staying in London to lobby wavering MPs, she chose to fly to Paris for a summit marking the end of the Cold War. It was a decision that would haunt her. The results came in. Thatcher won 204 votes to Heseltine's 152. She had won, but not by enough for an outright victory under party rules. A second ballot would be required. More importantly, the fact that 152 MPs had voted against a sitting prime minister was devastating. Her authority was crumbling. Upon her return to London, Thatcher remained characteristically defiant. "I fight on," she declared to reporters. "I fight to win." But behind the scenes, the reality was setting in. She needed to gauge her support for the second round of voting, so she summoned her ministers one by one to her office. As they waited outside, something crucial happened. The ministers talked among themselves and realized they all agreed on what needed to happen. One after another, they went in and delivered essentially the same message. As Thatcher later recalled, "Of course, if you wish to stand, I'll support you, but I don't think you can win. And I think, therefore, you should let other people stand and stand down." It was a masterclass in political cowardice, each minister telling her what she didn't want to hear while maintaining plausible deniability. That night, Margaret Thatcher, who famously needed only 4 hours of sleep, had a lot to think about. The next morning's cabinet meeting was extraordinary. Caroline Slockock, a senior civil servant who was present, later described the scene. Thatcher stood before her cabinet, just one woman surrounded by men, and began to read a short statement announcing her resignation. As soon as she started, Slockock recalled, she started to cry and then to sob, and she was really struggling to get the words out. Some of her ministers were also wiping away tears, though Chris Patten would later note with characteristic British cynicism, "I think we all know that quite a lot of crocodiles keep a handkerchief handy." In the second ballot, John Major, with Thatcher's support, defeated both Heseltine and Douglas Hurd to become the new Conservative leader. And on November 28th, Margaret Thatcher stood on that doorstep one final time, fighting back tears as she waved goodbye. After her audience with Queen Elizabeth II, she and her husband Denys left for their new home in Dulwich, South London. She insisted she would be back in Parliament the next morning because work was the only thing she knew. But everything had changed. For the rest of her life, Margaret Thatcher never recovered from that sense of betrayal. The woman who had fought and won so many battles, who had faced down miners' strikes and Argentine generals, had been brought down by her own colleagues in what she called a genteel political assassination. In 1993, she reflected on those final days with words that still sting. It was treachery with a smile on its face. Perhaps that was the worst thing of all. The irony is inescapable. Margaret Thatcher built her political career on being tough, uncompromising, and willing to make enemies. She famously said, "If you want something said, ask a man. If you want something done, ask a woman." She cultivated an image of the Iron Lady who would never bend or break. But in the end, it was precisely these qualities that destroyed her. By treating her cabinet as subordinates rather than colleagues, by demanding loyalty while showing little in return, by becoming, as one observer put it, increasingly regal in her bearing, she created the conditions for her own downfall. Her ministers didn't revolt because they disagreed with her policies, though many did. They revolted because she had made it impossible to work with her. The lesson from Margaret Thatcher's fall is timeless. Power without humility is fragile. Leadership without listening is temporary. And no matter how strong you think you are, no matter how many battles you've won, the moment you stop treating your allies with respect is the moment you begin your own decline. Margaret Thatcher left office on November 28, 1990. But the manner of her leaving ensured that the wounds would never fully heal, for her or for her party.